I'm almost 50, strong, clear, energized. Training hard, living clean, fully alive. But it didn't start here. 30 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I felt hopeless. But I chose a different path. No meds, just science, discipline, and results. Now I'm symptom-free and asking the tough questions that move us all forward. This is Hope and Health. Let's go. Hello and welcome to Hope and Health. I'm Mathew Embry, and today we're talking to Dr. Gordon Hasick, who is a certified NUCCA chiropractor, researcher, and educator. Dr. Hasick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Let's jump right into this. What exactly is NUCCA, and why should people with neurological conditions care?
Well, NUCCA it's an acronym for the National Upper Cervical Chiropractic Association. And it has its roots in going back to the 50s and 60s. Dr. Ralph Gregory in Monroe, Michigan, is the chiropractor behind this. Chiropractic's always had a history of upper cervical focus. There was a period in time back in the early days with B.J. Palmer, who was the son of the originator of chiropractic, who focused a lot on the upper cervical spine. So there's lots of ways to look at the upper neck region. And it was always felt that it's a critical part of the spine neurologically. And when you look at it, the first two vertebrae are unique in their architecture and design. They're the only two segments in the spine that don't have an intervertebral disc. And it's also the weight of the head, somewhere in the range of 12 to 16 pounds, sits on a small vertebrae, a couple of ounces. And it's actually the portal between the brain and the body.
Okay, so for people who don't know much about what upper cervical means, what are we talking about? Like where the head connects to the spine?
Exactly, yes. Sorry, yeah, and then it's the relationship, it's where the articulation is of the head to the spine. And C1, the first vertebrae we refer to as the atlas, a little bit like Charles Atlas, who carried the weight of the world. So the atlas vertebrae and the second vertebrae are articulating or put together in a very unique way. And they can misalign in an infinite number of directions. So what NUCCA has focused on, thanks to Dr. Gregory's years of research and development, has been a very precise way of measuring which way that vertebral misalignment has occurred for each person, measured on X-ray, and calculating a way to restore it back to its natural normal position. So NUCCA is really based on the restoration principle, which means we measure its misalignment and restore it to its natural neutral position. Why it's so important is because that misalignment impacts a part of the brain stem, which is the reticular formation. It's a part of the brain stem that's responsible for influencing the postural muscles of the body and the spine. So we refer to this little misalignment as the atlas subluxation complex. And that measurable misalignment on X-ray and imaging causes pressure on the brainstem, and it creates a syndrome, which is the atlas subluxation complex syndrome, which we measure posture and leg length inequality. So within the NUCCA community are methods for measuring postural symmetry or asymmetry. Posture is probably one of the greatest reflections of our health and function. So spinal alignment, postural alignment really are markers of one's individual capacity in a way. So NUCCA has always looked at posture and leg length inequality as a metric of, is there pressure on that brainstem that needs to be cared for? And so one of the unique qualities and styles of approach that NUCCA provides is when there's an optimal correction provided as seen and measured on post X-ray, there's a tendency to stabilize and stay that way for long periods of time. So in my clinical experience, and now when I make a first correction with a patient on day one, and if it's optimally corrected, measured on X-ray, percentage-wise, close to 100%, there's a 90% chance they'll keep that alignment through the first couple months I see them, and often beyond, which can extend out for many years for some people. So NUCCA's primary focus is reducing practitioner dependency.
Okay, so for someone who's never heard of this, has no experience, and I'm going to try to break this down, and you tell me if I've got this incorrect. So more or less, the way someone's spine connects to their head is off somehow, like it's not in alignment. And when that is not in alignment, that's going to have all sorts of ramifications for the body in regards to posture, the way they walk. I'm sure it's probably the way they sleep. I'm sure there's huge amounts of things that this influences the body. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And so the goal with the work you're doing is you're trying to make sure literally the person's head's on straight.
Absolutely.
Now, this sounds kind of scary. I mean, can it be, is a snap? Like, how does it work? What do you do to get the head on right?
Well, again, and that's an excellent point, is that, a lot of people, understandably, that's a very vulnerable part of the body to work on. One of the hallmarks of NUCCA is the gentleness and accuracy of the procedure. And so that was the genius of Dr. Gregory. He developed a way to generate a force from the doctor, and it is a hand adjustment, not an instrument adjustment. So there are other procedures in chiropractic that work on the upper neck area using instrument, but NUCCA is the hand adjustment. And he developed what's called the triceps pull. It's a way to reverse engineer the triceps muscle to compress the shoulders in a way of the doctor to deliver a precise force along a vector using the mathematics that are calculated from the X-ray. So the ability to do that it provides a gentle force that is sufficient to move everything three-dimensionally back to neutral natural posture, as measured on X-ray, without it hurting at all. And so there's a real difference between, like, the quantity of force that's generated is significant to overcome, we'll call the resistance in that misalignment, but it's done with a way that there's very little depth. So what a person would feel would be equivalent of having your pulse taken. So that's how gentle it is.
So there's no cracking.
There's no cracking, there's no rotational movements. It's different than spinal manipulative therapy, which most people associate with chiropractic. And spinal manipulative therapy has tremendous value in other parts of the spine. But when it comes to the unique architecture of the upper neck area, it's not as tolerant of random forces being introduced to it because it's not fully restored. And again, back to the restoration principle. So that's what makes that upper neck with no disc between it. And I've read tens of thousands of x-rays over 45, 47 years almost now. And everyone has a unique mathematical misalignment. There's no two people the same. We're all special snowflakes. Nobody is exactly the same misalignment. So the personalness and the precision are also unique to NUCCA that way.
So how do people get misaligned? Like, how do people's heads become crooked?
That's a great question. I mean, I'll say life, but mostly it's, growing up, falling down, falling off bikes, and probably one of the most common ones that we see today is concussion. And when people think of a concussion, they think of a head injury, but it's not just a head injury, it's a head neck injury because, again, as we're talking about, the head articulates with C1. And the forces that are created to cause the concussive force is also sufficient to misalign the upper neck.
So you're a young person, you're playing hockey, you're playing football, and you get a concussion. Your head gets out of alignment with your spine. What are the long-term ramifications of this?
Well, that's a great question. That's what we're trying to study right now. And that's what I'm particularly and personally studying, which is linked to this migraine study that I did a few years ago. And in the migraine study that I did here in Calgary, I don't know how deep you want me to go into this because, this has really opened up an understanding, I think, of the impact of the atlas subluxation on vascular flow and CSF flow, cerebrospinal fluid flow.
Mm-hmm.
And in the migraine study, these were patients who had anywhere from 10 to 26 migraine days a month, averaging 23 years. They all came through the Foothills Hospital Chronic Headache and Management Program, and they saw the neurologist there, Dr. Werner Becker, who was world-renowned in migraine. So these were patients who struggled a lot, and migraine carries a very high disability index. And so these are people suffering. 90% of those patients had a history of concussion or whiplash, most of them early in life, sometimes before even age 10.
So you have this huge population of people with migraines. Almost all of them had whiplash.
Yes. There's usually an event that occurs in our lives that disrupts that alignment and the integrity of that alignment. And it can seem very benign for a lot of people. Like, I think people measure, the metric for measuring is, well, I'm not dead, I didn't end up in ICU, I'm not bleeding out, so I'm fine. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just one or the other. Mm-hmm. But what it does is disrupts something that has an outcome often years later. And then that's why, for me at this point, one of the most important demographics that people, I think, need to be evaluated and checked are kids. Kids who are active in sports, who get concussions, who get all sorts of, contact sport in particular, but most sports are demanding.
After people had the NUCCA treatment and they were suffering with migraines, some of them were actually able to get off their medication. Now, why is that?
It's not like NUCCA fixes migraines. Let's be clear about that. When I treat a patient, I'm not just treating their atlas subluxation complex. I'm actually treating the patient and not their symptom. And so which I think is not always in every NUCCA practice, but it's certainly in my practice, I look at a lot of lifestyle markers as well. And there's a number of things that are usually missing in most people's lifestyle. And one of them is hydration. People are often dehydrated. How they breathe is critically important. Oxygenation is important. Indoor air quality is important. Their nutrition is critically important. So the biochemistry that takes place in a human being is influenced so strongly by what we eat, And then another critical marker, for people's health and well-being is their rest. And, there's research that's come out, actually done by this physicist in Florida that I've worked with, who just did a study on how our respiration, how we breathe and how deeply we breathe lying down, influences how cerebrospinal fluid exits the spine. And the more deeply we can breathe, which is usually in deep sleep, it increases the evacuation of CSF out of the brain, which its primary function at night is to detoxify the brain and reduce the inflammation that exists from the day's activities.
So for our audience, it's mostly people who are dealing with multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
This is for our podcast and for the audience that I reach. I personally have been doing NUCCA practice for almost 8 years in my life. Why is it critically important for MS patients to be looking at their upper cervical health?
In a healthy individual, blood is going in and out without restriction. CSF flows without restriction. But when they did these studies and looked at other groups, MS, migraine, and concussion, they all exhibited an abnormal flow pattern. So normally at night when we lie down, the blood is drained through the primary jugular veins or primary roots that are larger and more efficient to evacuate blood. When they studied these demographics, those patients actually didn't use their primary jugulars as often. They used secondary roots, which are slower and less efficient at detoxifying the brain. So this is all theoretical at this point. And this is my perspective on it after studying this literally for the last, I was thinking about it, it's 22 years since I started to this migraine study. So it takes a long time to do clinical trials and things. So, but having reviewed this, and I've spoken to some really key experts around the world who understand intracranial pressure management, blood flow, and vascular insufficiency. And so there's a very complex mechanism of inflammation that takes place in a brain, which is central to the MS world. So it's believed that it's an inflammatory response, an immune response that demyelinates the tissue to varying degrees. But my sense is, if you look into the history with each of these people, there's high probability they've had a head and neck injury at some point in their life. And my feeling is that that misalignment disrupts. I have enough understanding clinically and now through some of this basic research that there's a limitation in flow of blood and CSF. And it increases intracranial pressure and it keeps the brain in an inflammatory state. And some people, again, we're all looking for the one thing that's going to make the difference. So many patients many people with MS have done miraculously by getting their diet changed and really cleaning up what they eat, because that is a real contributor to inflammatory process for some people.
Mm.
Some it's hydration, Then there was a whole period of time that people looked at the vascular insufficiency. So improving the venous drainage created symptomatic changes for people, and Dr. Arata in California, who also had the theory of that actually the ballooning process actually activated part of the autonomics and regulated the autonomic nervous system, which also shifted for some people. So there's lots of theories that we're still working on to try and understand the physiological mechanisms. But I think when it comes to healthcare in general, there's a general held belief that there's one thing that causes things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's that simple. I think it's complex. It includes all of the dimensions of what make us human and what makes our physiology optimal. So to understand the physiology, more importantly, then you can understand pathophysiology.
Got it. So for people with multiple sclerosis, what you're saying is there was some sort of interference when it came to the blood flow and the flow of the CSF?
Yeah, CSF, yeah.
So how does NUCCA help correct blood flow?
Well, at this point, it's a preliminary finding, and the study that we did had a small sample size, so I can't, confirm with you that NUCCA will do this with every patient, number one. My personal experience with this says that, there's an optimization that takes place by correcting that misalignment, the atlas subluxation complex in the upper neck area. The one thing that I can say for sure that NUCCA does is change people's posture.
Mm.
And I've seen that consistently with tens of thousands of patients. Their symptomatic picture may not change for everyone. They may not notice lots of different changes. For some, it's life-altering, there's no question. And I can give you countless stories of those. But, there's no one thing for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing it does is changes posture. And our relationship to gravity and how we navigate time and space from a balanced posture innately is going to be that much more stable and functional. We're just starting to get into the first layer of understanding the physiology of the brain and the blood that's going in and out and CSF. Personally, I think that the real issue for migraine, MS patients and concussion patients, which also share very similar symptoms, lies in the realm of the inability to evacuate CSF from the brain.
So that's getting that proper flow of the CSF out of the brain and into the body.
Correct.
And so let's go back to some of the things you've seen. So with MS patients in particular, what kind of results have you, I know this isn't scientific, the studies are double blind, but what have you personally seen with your own eyes?
Well, phenomenologically and clinically, I've seen near miraculous things with MS patients in particular. And I can think pretty much every one of them, symptoms developed after trauma.
Mm.
A car accident, concussion, a fall. And some were right after a car accident. They developed the sequence of MS symptoms. They were diagnosed with MS. And the imaging would certainly show, the lesions in the brain, which are a big question. What are those real lesions? I've talked to neuroradiologists about what these lesions are, and we're still unpacking that. Mm-hmm. They're getting better at imaging and understanding which are the lesions that are demyelinated and which aren't. But the MS patients that I've seen have had, sometimes complete remission. And I don't like to, because it's often used in the MS world that they've just gone into remission.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure they've gone into remission. I think they may have actually recovered.
You think that once you've restored that flow, that the patients are just more or less stopping the disease process?
The caveat here is correcting the atlas subluxation and improving the flow is the first step. It doesn't stop there. They have to make sure they're hydrated every day adequately. Mm-hmm. They have to be rested every day adequately. Their diet has to be really pristine for what their body tolerates. Mm-hmm. They need to be moving and active every day, not exercising, but actually, I'm a huge advocate of stretching and mobility and walking as baseline activity every day. I mean, most people today, unfortunately, are sedentary. They sit too much. Mm-hmm. We're also inundated with screen time, less activity, less movement, less circulation. Some people don't get out enough. They don't get into nature. So there's all of those components that are responsible for people's recovery, not just the one correction of the upper neck. It is a kind of a foundational piece, and I'm more heavily biased because I've been doing it a very long time, and I've watched it as a turning point. Another thing that I think is really important to consider is when people get correct, like when I make my first correction with a patient, I'm very clear that this is a process that will extend out over the next 12, 18 months. So it's not a couple weeks that they're going to recover. The first 2 months is really when the structure of the body integrates, but neurologically it's a 12, 18-month process. And I've watched it with tens of thousands of people who stayed with the process. They see progressive improvement over that 18-month window with stability and function. And the thing that makes the biggest difference is when they commit to doing the lifestyle changes that are needed. Hydration, rest, movement, nutrition. They're doing something meaningful and they're engaged in their lives that's renewing for them, that's unique to them. So all of those things add to the quality of outcomes beyond just getting corrected. We need to have a good relationship to gravity. We have to get along with gravity, and ultimately we need our head on straight to do that.
Dr. Hasick, if someone's watching this right now and they want to investigate NUCCA, if they want to try it, they want to see if they've got a misalignment with their head and their spine, where do they start?
Well, finding a NUCCA doctor it's a bit of a discrimination. The NUCCA organization has a website, which is nucca.org. And on that is a list of practitioners who are current and active members with the organization. I would start there. And all NUCCA doctors listed on that site have, all the core training to provide, safe and good care. Within our organization, we have a certification process, which allows doctors who want to commit to that advanced learning to put their work in front of their peers, and it refines their work because the atlas subluxation complex can be complex, exactly. So NUCCA, provides that on the website is a directory for practitioners. And just to be clear, there's very few in the world.
And there's a lot of also pitfalls because I think, when I've been out there, there are people who claim they're NUCCA specialists, but actually aren't. So what kind of risks or what do patients need to be aware of?
Well, exactly. And unfortunately, we live in the world of fake news and misrepresentation. So the NUCCA website is the most accurate way to find a certified NUCCA doctor and practitioners who are engaged in our membership, and so who've got the training to do the work. Because there's a lot of variance across the chiropractic community and even outside the chiropractic community of people who claim to be doing this upper neck work. Mm-hmm. The hallmarks of the work, the x-rays are done before and afterwards. So there's always an imaging series that's done. The adjustment should be done as a very hand-oriented adjustment that's done gently. Yeah, beyond that, the best way is if you're looking for somebody to reach out to the NUCCA organization, then they can help direct you to the nearest practitioner who could help.
So the process is I find a NUCCA specialist, I go there, I get x-rays.
Well, first you get evaluated to see if you're a candidate.
Okay.
Not everyone is a candidate for the care. So in my practice, probably 20 to 23% of new patients I see, I don't treat, simply because they don't present with an atlas subluxation complex. Their posture is within normal limits. They don't have any leg length inequality. So the only time x-rays are done is if you actually have a problem that would likely benefit from what we do. And so the first visit is, with practitioners is to determine, are you out of alignment or not? Do you need to be adjusted?
Now, is this true that it's also, if you have a baby, they're good to get looked at as well because the birthing process can be traumatic for the neck?
The birthing process can be traumatic for the neck, and having babies checked is important, but that, I think, personally feels that falls into the category of a different type of care, not necessarily NUCCA. NUCCA care, you need to do the x-ray series to be really accurate. There are other chiropractic, techniques that work with babies and infants. As a rough rule, I check kids, and my own 3 children have all had falls and injuries and stuff that they got checked around age 5. They rode their bike off a cliff and landed in the river head first, or, they do all these crazy things. So, but around age 5, when they're able to, stand and be measured, there's other procedures, craniosacral therapy, which is also a really it's not chiropractic, but it's a technique that influences the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. And it also works with the cranial system for babies who have tough deliveries. So NUCCA, again, there's an age appropriateness to it, especially if imaging is required.
Now, it's been a process for me that I've done multiple times, especially over the last 5 years. And, and I'm, I think, lucky in a way that I know when I'm off. So I can sense a minor shift in my balance or perception, how I'm walking, enough that I just know. But I think for some people, they don't know that. And let's talk about speed and how fast to get into the clinic. When my daughter had a concussion playing volleyball, we had her in within 24 hours and she was 12% off already. How quick do people need to get checked out once they've had a head injury?
That's a great question. And I think there's a spectrum on head injury. We go from mild traumatic brain injury, which is a concussion, all the way up to traumatic brain injury, which that would have, bleeds and microbleeds or even severe bleeds. So I think the sooner you want to look at the patient, you need to consider the severity of the concussion and the injury. I have a patient whose husband had a serious car accident recently, and it has major bleed, skull fracture, bleeding, all sorts of things going on. So we've set it up to see him in about a 4 to 6 week window downstream to give the brain and the body a chance to settle before we would even consider intervening. So on that extreme level there. But if it's a more mild concussion, what you did was absolutely, I think, the right thing, is you get in and get checked right away. Because the restriction in blood flow is really important to mitigate inflammatory responses, I think, because you drop into cranial pressure.
Now, how do people find out about this? I mean, are there emergency doctors recommending this when someone comes in with a concussion? Are GPs recommending this?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, really. I don't know if they're recommending. I can tell you personally, I had a phone call from an emergency room physician one time. He had my patient in there who was a migraine patient, and he called to make sure that I could see him right away.
So the information is getting out there.
The information is getting out. And it's so interesting for me to watch the arc of time over 45, 46 years. NUCCA is certainly way more well-known today than it was when I started. And I think the reason it's becoming so well-known is because the results that patients see getting the care are unparalleled.
And Dr. Hasick, you've said healing is not a destination. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a process and it's a journey. And I don't know that, health is not just a static state. We never hit this one place in our life where it's all together. We live in a world that's dynamic, it's changing. There's always demands on our physiology, our neurology. So, healing is an interesting term because a lot of people want to be cured. Mm-hmm. And that means you're done. But to be healthy, we need to every day we have to do basic stuff.
And so what you're saying is, and I don't want to read too much into this, the journey of life is a constant pursuit of optimal health.
Yes. And if you look, I think it was Hans Selye who was kind of the grandfather of stress, and a great Canadian out of Montreal. And he had a quote, which I won't get exactly, but it's around our ability to adapt. And our ability to adapt is what will enable us to continue to survive and thrive.
In 45 years of practicing, what have the common, say, themes or the common strategies you've seen for people who've been really successful in overcoming health challenges?
It's a relationship and a partnership between what I do and what they do every day. So I've never healed a patient. I've only removed the obstacle that's got in the way of their normal natural physiology expressing itself. So, for me, the body is an incredibly intelligent system. And that goes way beyond our understanding and intellect. But it's in nature, it's everywhere. And so we have this drive towards optimal called homeostasis. And it's driven towards maintain an optimal range where the body functions best. And it requires baseline simple things. One is the body's relationship to gravity and the alignment of the spine for the impact that spinal misalignment has on the nervous system, and now we know blood flow and cerebrospinal fluid flow. The autonomic nervous system, which regulates us as it reads the body, the environment, and adapts to the environment. So having an alignment of the body and structurally is like a foundational piece. And then supporting that with how we breathe, the amount of hydration and quality of water we have, the rest that we get. And I think pretty much culturally we're sleep deprived and rest deprived, and technology has hacked many people's ability to sleep. And we're also living in a very challenging time. So our nervous system is more upregulated and it's harder to rest. So mental rest and physical rest are really important. You know, movement, walking, stretching, baseline stuff. And then sports, activity, lifting weights, cardio, all, you know, spectrum depending on your body's ability to do that. But you need your alignment to be able to really do a lot of physical activity successfully. You know, the nutrition side is very complex. And as we've watched, you know, the shift in agriculture and the difference between North America or Europe in terms of GMOs, quality of food, not only what we eat, but how we eat, the time we take to slow down, cook, you know, eating on the run, eating while we work. And then, you know, those are all things that impact our physiology and our health and our neurology. You know, and for me, there's another category, and I teach this to, you know, I give this to every one of my patients to do these practices consistently. And the other part is, you know, are we engaged with something that's ultimately meaningful for us as a human, that's unique to who we are? You know, and so taking time out every day to stop taking care of everything and everyone else and consider, what is it that I need? You know, what does my body need? What does my soul need? What's needed here?
Dr. Hasick, you said having something meaningful in one's life is really important in getting those optimal health outcomes. What do you mean by that?
This is my personal life experience and view, is that, you know, everyone has something to contribute in this life, and we're all different and unique, you know, and to be true to ourselves and authentic means, you know, getting to know what is that's uniquely living within us. What are our interests? And I think tracking that, probably one of the best ways is what resonates for you. So for some people, you know, it could be knitting, or it could be, you know, sports, or it could be family or kids or business. You know, like everybody, there's not like there's one answer that this is what you should do with your life. And this is part of life's journey. It's certainly different in the second half of life than it is in the first half of life. And so for me, it's always been there's a curiosity about, there's more going on here. I know for me personally that nature is an intelligent system, that things happen for optimal reasons. There's a drive towards it. And I don't understand them all. I mean, I do love the Robert Frost quote. I mean, you know, we dance in a circle and suppose, while the mystery sits in the center and knows.
Mm-hmm. You also said a word earlier. You said soul when you were talking about someone's well-being. You don't often hear that when you're in the same sense as people talk about science. How important is spirituality in someone's journey?
I think it's essential, because it is essentially who we are. You know, we're more than a physical body. And, you know, the electrical energy that animates us. And I've had the privilege and the difficulty of being with my parents as they both passed away. You know, and so there's something that animated them that's no longer in that physical body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so these are questions that have, you know, age-old questions. You know, and I just returned from a trip to Greece, and, you know, thousands of years of history, and, you know, the Acropolis that was on this one island, you know, was a temple, you know, and so where people went to worship. And so it's not that, you know, humans, you know, this has been a constant theme inside of each human, is to try and answer the mysterious question. And I think that, you know, it's a kind of an innate part of what makes us unique. As, you know, we have a self-reflective capacity. We have a questioning curiosity capacity. And that's not for everyone. Not everyone, you know, is interested in questioning things beyond the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And how it relates to the human body's physiology has a lot to do with accessing an essential natural energy. We have a nature that's really a true nature that actually you could see it in quantum physics. Things move, and Einstein's been quoted lots of times in terms of, this mysterious universe.
Mm-hmm. And how do you balance spirituality with science?
It's a practice, just like everything else. And I have a practice. And I guess for me, looking back on my life journey, it's been serendipitous. Like things show up at certain times to offer me something to study. Mm-hmm. And it started for me early with my mom in the late 60s, early 70s, doing hatha yoga with some ladies down the street. And yoga in those days wasn't that popular. So there's books lying around the house I started to read, and I started to do some yoga practice. Mm-hmm. And so that's always been a central piece of my life since I was probably 13 or 14.
And I think in what I try to share, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, is that ability to recognize when answers are showing up is something that needs to be learned. And I think someone who's watching this podcast right now, this information is getting to them for a very specific reason, whether they like it or not. The information does seem to present to people to solve their problems when they need it.
Correct.
And I think that if someone can figure that out, or they recognize that that's occurring, it can start leading them in a way.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. And it requires a certain permeability to be able to take in information. And I'll have to say, I'm going to take a little sidestep here. For patients who get diagnosed with MS or any sort of life-threatening illness, I think for most people, they immediately go into fear. Mm. And there's a negativity bias that we carry, and we'll usually go to the worst case scenario. That is a difficult place to be permeable to new information because you're in survival mode. And I think a diagnosis can be like a sentence in a jail cell in a way that people often get stuck in that doesn't allow them any other possibility. The permeability and the ability to kind of see the subtle things, again, another way to say it is, whatever's here must be needed in some way. Mm-hmm. But I think that's kind of a fundamental thing, and I do this when I sit down with my new patients. The most common thing is people go, "What's wrong with me?" And my response is, there's nothing wrong with you. Everything's right about this. And when we go back and understand their life story, the falls, the bumps, the scrapes, the bruises, the misalignments, the concussions, what's presenting itself in their physiology at this time isn't wrong. It's actually perfectly makes sense. Mm-hmm. If you know how to look at it from a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, I've felt that a diagnosis is a catalyst. It's a wake up. It's, you've tried your best up until this point. You're diagnosed with whatever illness. In my case, it's MS, but now you got to change. And then the question becomes, how much are you willing to change, and in what categories? And that seems to be all categories. So nutrition, exercise, sleep, water, making sure your body is in alignment, and then spiritual practices and disciplines seems to be the equation, but it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And that's what requires, the commitment to yourself as a kindness to take care of those things. And they're boring, they're routine, they're mundane, but the real change comes with commitment to every day. Mm-hmm. Ish, I'll say.
Well, my hashtag is no cheat days. And so that's how I try to live my life, where every day is a chance to see how far you can push your disciplines.
100%. I think also in this whole mix of a kind of difficulty like that, one of the most valuable energies is compassion. Mm. And compassion for ourselves. We didn't mean to get to these places, but we did. And we're doing our best because often nobody's educated us or given us any guidance to how to change our lives. Mm-hmm. Our healthcare system's interesting that way because it's really not a healthcare system. It's designed, understandably, and works well for acute illness. And when there's trauma, bleeding, missing limbs, whatever, you definitely need the medical system to come in to attend to acute illness. But MS and so many of the illnesses today are chronic. They're not acute. And they are often linked to lifestyle. But again, our educational system, the healthcare system doesn't encourage respecting the innate intelligence the human body has to self-heal. It doesn't encourage prevention. In my work at the Banff Center in Leadership Development, we used to run lots of groups through there, and we had a group from AHS, Alberta Health Services, come through. And we were working on leadership with them. And we talked about prevention, and a very small percentage of the budget is spent on prevention. Most is on treatment. And the treatment is symptomatic orientation, not causation. Coming back to the question you asked me, what are the people who've had the greatest outcomes and best results? They're the ones who partner with their practitioner. They get the care for the human body that's needed, but they take on the responsibility in a kind and compassionate way to commit to a lifetime of practicing, to look after themselves the best they can within the means they've got, so that their human physiology with its intelligent system can optimize.
So for someone out there who's struggling, would you say there's a way out for almost anything?
I'm not sure there's a way out, but there's definitely a way through. There's a way through it. And to me, that's what real strength is about. We have a culture that's really focused on strength. Go to the gym, push weights, do all those things. I think one of the greatest strengths we have to practice and develop is our ability to be with what is, reality as it is, where we are, and stay with things and go through the difficult times the best we can. That, you talk about strength, oh my God, that really takes a strength of that individual and integrating all the aspects of who they are, psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, physiologically.
Well, Dr. Hasick, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. You've given us so much information to think about and to lead us towards optimal health. Thank you, and congratulations on the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. Hope and Health is made possible through generous donations. To learn more or support the show, visit mshope.com, where you'll find free science-based resources.